You're listening to Liberty USA, sponsored by County Citizens Defending Freedom. You, as an American, have freedom in your DNA, and we are here to help educate, empower, and encourage you to stand for your freedom.
Hello, County citizens. You've seen us promote 2,000 Mules, the new documentary, on our social media and through our counties. And today we have the very special opportunity to be with Catherine from True the Vote herself. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We also have Sarah, our elections division leader, here today with us.
I'm here.
So, Catherine, how successful was 2,000 Mules from your perspective?
Oh, I think it surpassed our wildest hopes. We wanted to get the story told, and even more than that, we really wanted to move the needle. We wanted to create a space to have a conversation that the country desperately needs to have. And I mean, you can look at, you know, the number of viewers and the polling that's coming. All those things are great. I mean, that's exceeding, you know, breaking all kinds of records. But I think the thing that's most gratifying is that it seems to have afforded this conversation where people are sharing video, talking about it. It doesn't matter if you're Republican, Democrat, Independent, really anywhere in the world. We're just getting positive feedback, and that's what I'm most excited about.
Well, I know our theaters in Lakeland and Tampa were sold out.
I think across the country they were sold
Right.
out.
Yeah.
Yeah. From our perspective, it was so successful. We showed it
Absolutely.
through all of our counties, pushed it on our social media. So I think that's why we're so grateful that you're sitting down with us today.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So let's get into data before 2,000 Mules. What is geotracking in geospatial locations?
Sure. So geotracking, and there are all kind of nuances to the term, so I'll just sort of broadly describe the two big buckets that we use. The first, geospatial data, involves primarily cellular phone signals. So when you have your cell phone, it's sending up signals constantly. Specifically for what we used, it is related to the apps on your phone. Older technology is more GPS driven, so it's really more about the mapping, and it's trying to triangulate around, you know, cell towers. That's sort of early 2000s. It's advanced a lot, but nonetheless, it's a little older. What we used specifically is marketing data, ad key data, app driven data. So as you put apps on your phones, or the ones that are resident on your phones, they are all sending up signals every few seconds that are giving off your longitude, your latitude, your elevation, and the time. And so with those elements, plus there's a number of other sort of profile related data points that come up with that, all of that is being sucked up, you know, 24/7 about anybody that's carrying a cell phone. And there are companies out there that have made this into a market. And then they sell that data for a variety of purposes. And so that's the geospatial piece of cell phone tracking that we used. The other element that's important in sort of the formula that went on to become 2,000 Mules is geofencing. So if you want to determine how often a device goes into a certain area, you establish what is broadly referred to as a geofence, which is basically, I want to put in, you know, our planet is gridded. I mean, it's just, everything is very, very digitally tied. You want to put in the coordinates of the area that you're trying to measure, and every time a device goes through, so if I geofenced around this piece of paper, every time a device went in past this fence line, I would count it. And so that those two elements of the geospatial data broadly, and then the geofencing, in our case we used that around drop boxes and then ultimately around nonprofit organizations, became the keys to unlocking what we went on to find in the jurisdictions where we were studying.
And how accessible is this data? Can anyone, if they have the means to, purchase this data?
Absolutely.
So it's not an FBI governmental clearance you have to have?
No, you just have to, you know, for us, because we're in the technology business, we knew that the data existed, and it was just a function of how to find it and how to find the best purveyors. And then, you know, you have to be thoughtful about creating a cross section. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that goes into it, but no, it's absolutely available, and it's being collected about all of us every day, all day long.
What made you think to use this technology to track mules?
I honestly, I think it was just a bit of just inspiration, where we were really trying to figure out what can we do to pull the curtain back on what may be happening. It's another important element of all of this, is that we could have been totally wrong.
Sure.
We could have purchased all this data, gone through all of these iterations, and
Found nothing.
Found nothing. And you know what? Okay, well then we proved it, and there wasn't anything there. But the thought was really, I mean, we were tangentially aware that cell phone data existed, and tangentially aware of its utility. So it just, you know, how do we assemble a team? How do we assemble the best team that we can that is accustomed to working with government agencies and military efforts? And how do we put this together in a way that we absolutely swing for the fences? And then we just went for it.
How expensive is this data?
It is very expensive. The data is very expensive, but then the analysis of the data and moving that much data is really just as, if not more, expensive, because it just takes so much time and attention to the variances in the data and in the patterning to really, I mean, you're studying it month upon month upon month. And so in total, I mean, I haven't really stopped we're still spending it, so I mean, I haven't really stopped to add it up, but millions and millions of dollars have gone towards this effort.
And do police and law enforcement use this tracking as well?
All day, every day, absolutely. I mean, that's, you know, go back and search online for cell phone data and murder, or cell phone data and January 6th. And you will find find all kinds of things. It's widely used, yes.
Right, okay, because now we're seeing on the media that this isn't the accurate way to track.
Right.
And so
It's been respected data for quite some time.
Oh my word! I mean, it is the standard. In fact, oh my gosh, I just went blank on the Supreme Court. Justice Roberts went blank. John Roberts, in a case that really set the tone for the use of geospatial data, Carpenter v. U.S. Roberts talked about geospatial data as being as accurate as having a digital ankle bracelet.
Sure.
I mean, it is absolutely immutable, and is in many ways even more exacting than video surveillance, because it gives you that you can deduce a pattern of life from it that is undeniable. So yes, it's incredibly accurate.
I was going to say that my Uber always knows where to pick me up.
Right, and knows your travel patterns, and knows the places you most frequent, and all of that tells a story about you.
So you started with 10 trillion cell phone pings. What did you do next?
Well, the very first thing we did was decide what jurisdictions we wanted to focus in on. And to be specific, that was the Atlanta area in Georgia, the Maricopa or Phoenix area in Arizona, Detroit, which is Wayne County in Michigan, Milwaukee County, Milwaukee in Wisconsin, and then Philadelphia County, Philadelphia in Pennsylvania. Those were our areas. And then we made a very curated buy of what kind of data we wanted to focus in on in the sea of geospatial availability. And the reason that we bought so much was that, I mean, my constant refrain to Greg and his team, we cannot be wrong. We have got to leave no stone unturned, take as much as we can to get as clear a picture as we can. And the difference is, based upon the data aggregators, but also the signals themselves or the apps themselves. Some apps give off signals every 2 or 3 seconds, some apps give off every 30 or 40 seconds, and so you've got to really have a good blend to get that full picture. So we started with 10 trillion and then just began to query the data. What's reasonable, you know? How many drop boxes would it be reasonable to go and visit, and what does that look like? And from there it's just going through a funnel, just through a grind of data to figure out.
And really, is more than one Dropbox visit reasonable?
You know, we thought, so the way that the data kind of looks, we started out initially just saying, okay, 3. We'll start with 3. Who's gone to more than 3 drop boxes? Now, when you start this process, you start a good bit away from the drop box or your target, and then you narrow it in. So it was very broad. It's like 3, who went to more than 3 at 100 feet, and then who went to more than 3 at 50 feet. And the goal is to get the data set down small enough that it's manageable so that you can really then begin to dig into the patterns. And so ultimately the numbers were still, and it's logical because these drop boxes were placed in high traffic, in most cases, not in all, which is one of the things that makes the pattern so interesting is when you start to get these drop boxes that are off the beaten path, and But we finally set in a threshold of 10. You had to go to at least 10 drop boxes to even make it in our study. And if you want to sort of visualize what ultimately we began to get super comfortable with, is if you think about the population of data being on sort of a bell curve, where this is how most of the population behaves, the data set that we ultimately carved out, and they went, of course, not just to drop boxes, but to nonprofit organizations, was so far, such an outlier. I mean, there was no reason, and with all the quality checks, everything we ran against it, it was this group that was so far outside the curve that we decided that's where we're going to start to set our metrics and dig. Mm-hmm. And that's what we did.
And then eventually you also used pings that were at 10 drop boxes, correct?
Right. So it was, if you have a device, and let's say this is your Dropbox, and now we've set up this geofence, and these are the coordinates. How many times does your cell phone go through those coordinates? And it could have been 10 times at the same Dropbox, which was not typical. What was more typical was going on routes. So you would go to more than 10 Dropboxes, and oftentimes those spread across different counties. And when we looked only during early election period and made sure that that device didn't follow that same pattern outside of an election. Mm-hmm. So if it was just for whatever reason, a pattern that somebody would normally travel, we wanted to be aware of that as a potential false positive. Mm-hmm. And the group that we focused in on met all those standards. They did not travel these patterns other than during election periods. They were, a lot of these questions that have come up. They were not county workers, because those you could track back to chain of custody, and you could timestamp it and pull those out.
Or mailmen.
Or
taxi drivers.
Exactly. I mean, and then you get into things like, taxi drivers or people that have driven by. Well, there's a very different trajectory. If I have now go back here into my Dropbox, if I'm a taxi driver and I drive past a Dropbox, that is very different than somebody going into into your coordinates. And so, there are a lot of attempts to try to discredit this or call the legitimacy of the process or the data into question. But
there were extensive parameters.
There were extensive parameters,
and
we could not be wrong. I mean, this is. Had we not surfaced what we found, we would have never. There would have gone on. I mean, it would have been swing and a miss. There was nothing there, and drop boxes were not as insecure as we feared they might have been, and that would have been an okay outcome. Mm-hmm. But that's not that's not what we ultimately found.
Did these pings also go back to stash houses?
Yes. So we started using this vernacular, and thank you for playing along with stash houses and mules, but we started using this vernacular because trying to kind of take you back in time when the first rounds came back and we began to see these still very unrefined patterns, but patterns nonetheless. I looked at Greg and said, okay, how do we take down a cartel? And that's when we began to use these terms like stash houses and drop points and mules. And the stash houses, again, not something that we had gone looking for, but we had whistleblowers and informants come forward through a variety of channels, but primarily through an election integrity hotline that we were running. And they had told us, and a number of them, about the nexus between nonprofits and drop boxes. And so we just measured it. I mean, is there something there or not? And that became the reference point of a stash house. But yes, so to make our criteria to be in the study, you had to go to a certain number, 10 minimum drop boxes, and a certain number, in most cases it was 5 minimum, of the stash houses or the nonprofit organizations.
And that's where they would pick up the abundance of ballots?
It would seem that, and this is of course why we continue to say law enforcement should investigate this, but it would seem that, and based upon what informants have told us, that yes, they go to the stash houses and pick up whatever it is that they're going to be responsible for distributing in any given period of time. our understanding is that stash houses function also not just for the distribution of ballots, but for the collection of ballots. And those ballots coming into the stash houses happen a few different ways, ranging from full-on neighborhood canvassing, where you're taking ballots, either you're knocking on doors and getting people to give you their ballots, or you're voting with them, or you're just taking it out of their mailbox, or other various ways. But there's a collection point, and then there's that distribution, and that's that back end that we really focused in on.
Mm-hmm. You said in a previous interview that 3 or more of the mules involved in the election were in the same building at the same time 71 times.
Mm-hmm. That was in, I don't remember if that was in Yuma County or Maricopa County. It was in Arizona. And these are all little, data point trivias, right? Like what would the reason for that be, given that was true along with everything else being true? Another interesting point out of Arizona, you may have it, is a couple of the mules went and were participating in Arizona during general election, and then when the special election opened up in Georgia, we see the mules travel from Arizona into Georgia and exhibit those same patterns. Again, had they not hit our benchmarks of 10 and 5, we would have never seen them in Georgia. Begging the question, why aren't we investigating this?
Mm-hmm. You have video footage of the ballot drop boxes. Is there video footage of the nonprofits and those same mules entering or exiting nonprofits?
I am fairly confident in saying that there is video footage. We do not have it. And again, I mean, going back in time, when we all of this first started, I mean, we were not nearly as refined in our process, and we first went to the to the FBI and presented what we had, and talked about where we thought this was potentially heading and wanted to really alert them.
Right.
And then we started at the state level in Georgia, same thing, wanting to just say, this is where we are. We're continuing down this path, but look at what we have thus far, because if you see merit in opening an investigation, my words, you have access to all kinds of video like that. Mm-hmm. And you could deploy state level resources that we could never come close to being able to support. So the thought at that point was, pull additional video. At that point, we were still thinking they had probably looked at the Dropbox surveillance video, which we now know nobody looked at it anywhere.
So they didn't take it serious?
I think they actually did take it seriously and considered it a threat, because the narrative out of Governor Kemp's office, and he appoints the head of the GBI, so that was a very much holding the company line was 2020 was the safest election. There was no fraud. They'll go away. Just stonewall them. They'll go away. And we just couldn't let that be. Yeah.
Were you in the tech world before starting True the Vote?
Yes. So Greg and I co-own a healthcare tech company where we find coverage options for people who are uninsured or underinsured, and we do that in real time. So if you walk into a hospital and you don't have a way to pay for your health care, we will help you find a way. And inside of that, we have become very aware of ways to better connect with patients, and then the privacy issues around that kind of data, and all that goes into, sadly, the all too broken state of American healthcare. But that's why we were comfortable with big data sets, comfortable with multivariate, considerations, and felt confident that when the path began to emerge, that it was worth continuing to travel down.
I was just curious because I hear people preach to my generation like, "Oh, you are the techie ones," and I'm sitting over here like this tech data world is so new to me.
Sure.
And it's it's like almost speaking
and to
another.
most, that would be so overwhelming. Well, 10 trillion?
10 trillion
that
cell
would
phone
be
beings.
very overwhelming to most.
Yeah.
It was a lot, but I think also what we see a lot and hear a lot from people is they are in disbelief that their phones are giving off that kind of information, and that it is out there for anybody.
Right.
And if you really want, which we did not do this because we kept it all anonymous and so forth, but if you wanted to de-anonymize that data and track it to a whole other sea of data elements. It is all there. Your life is not private.
So is there any precautions you take on your cell phone to make sure, like is there anything that you can do to make sure that your cell phone is secure, or is that just dead and gone?
Great question. So there are little things you can do, like you can turn off your location services. That's not going to stop everything, but it kind of throws a wrench into things. There are VPNs that you can put on your phone that sort of scramble up a message, but there are coming to market very soon far more sophisticated and consumer level devices and accessories that do scramble your signal in a way that makes you more difficult to find. And I would highly recommend people consider making that a part of their gear, because privacy is important.
That's great to know. There's a New York Times article I want to bring up.
Sure.
That was posted, and I'm sure you know about it. It
Oh,
was
yes.
titled America Under Watch, and it had a black background with all these green dots.
Oh, yeah.
And it showed all these different locations, the Pentagon, the White House, Mar-a-Lago. And in the article, they talked about this was the mainstream way to track, about how this is the new data of where our world's going.
That's right.
And I just think it's ironic that when that article came out, everybody's like, oh yeah, geotracking, pings, all of this. And then 2000 Mules comes out, and all of a sudden
And that
it's
same paper
inaccurate.
hits us, right?
You know?
What can you do? You can't make this stuff up.
No.
And reliable or not, it led you to the drop boxes that had video of mules.
Right.
Right.
So,
Right.
I mean, at the end of the day, it led you to the evidence.
Right, and our heart's desire then and now is still, it led us to at minimum a prerequisite for an investigation for state law enforcement or federal law enforcement to take a closer look at and follow the money and understand talk to some of these people and see what is going on. That goes beyond. I mean, we took it as far as we could and have had the movie was shot like 8 months ago. We've had a lot happen since then, but people are willing to talk about this if you handle it properly. So anyway, we still hold out hope, but it's been very frustrating.
I have to say, one of my favorite parts of 2000 Mules, and it's not funny, but it was funny to me because I'm watching it and I see these people in broad daylight with gloves on. And you probably know the clip I'm talking about. And there's a line of people waiting to go vote. And these people are just shoving and I'm not talking about 2 or 3 that maybe could be called for family members voting.
Right.
I'm talking about in the middle of daylight,
And the line
shoving
of people watching them with their heads turned.
Right.
Like, I just had to laugh at that part because it was so horrendous that I was like, this is now comical.
Yeah, no shame. I mean, just blatant fraud.
And I mean,
in front of an audience.
Right. And what are you going to do about it? I'll tell you guys something I've not ever spoken about on interview. I have had a recurring nightmare, let's just call it, since I started True the Vote, where a politician, who shall remain nameless, the dream is, he is standing on an infinite white stage and there are 3 cameras pointed at him. And I am behind one of the cameras. And I look through the lens and he looks at me with a great big grin and says, what are you going to do about it? And so you see things like that happening in broad daylight, and the question is, what are you going to do about it? Because it happens like this. And if law enforcement won't step in, and a citizen group, for crying out loud, is having to take it as far as we have, and still these politicos want to hold this line that, oh no, it was the most safe, most secure, perfect election. It's time for America to wake up and ask some hard questions.
Right.
I want to ask you, one of the critiques I've seen online is that 2000 Mules didn't show the data, the videos of the same mule hitting multiple drop boxes. Do you have that data?
We do, but let me put that in the proper framing.
Right.
So the very first thing that came out about the movie, the teaser, it was like a minute and a half long or something. In that video, we show the same person going to 3 drop boxes. It's one of the people that went in like a 24-hour period to 24 or more spots. Very active. The problem with the video it just sort of is shady looking. It's at night. You can sort of see the haze of somebody's. You see their profile, and then you see them in the back of them, and then you see them kind of cross through the corner of one. That's the same person. The problem is the video is either non-existent or not good quality. So what ultimately was decided in the movie, and I have greatest respect for Dinesh and the team in making the choices they made, but we only had so many good video clips that are really like full color, 4D, you can see everything, you can see them putting in. We have so much more video that is like grainy and or the camera is pointed at the ground, or the camera is pointed at the sky, or the camera doesn't work, or the video doesn't exist. We have, of our jurisdictions, we have asked all jurisdictions to provide all the video that was available. We did it in a timely manner. We did it in an appropriate way. In the greater Atlanta area, we got about 15% of the available, or what should have been available. The rest of it is MIA. They didn't do it or they destroyed it. No video in Pennsylvania. No video in Michigan. Well, actually not true. Michigan we got, but we got it, Detroit, but we got it too late, so it was not even in the movie. So that's still yet to come. Wisconsin and Milwaukee County, no video. And then in Arizona, Maricopa sent video, but it was of one Dropbox, and it was like shooting across a parking lot, like across a tarp, across a sandbox kind of thing to where this Dropbox is, that you can't, I mean, it's just a joke. So all of this to say, there is a lot more video, but you have to begin with the pings as the immutable standard and then see what you can see in the video. And that makes it hard in a movie because, you know, we want to see, you know, in Technicolor the crime.
Sure.
There's a lot more, though, yet to be revealed, and I'm sure we're going to get to it, but part of what we've already announced, and I cannot wait, is what we're calling pull the ripcord. And when we pull the ripcord and put all of this stuff out, put all the video out that we have, and we've gone back now and we've asked for video from 200 additional counties, posting all of that, I mean, there are people out there far smarter than we are that are going to go to town. I mean, they are going to dig into this video, and I am confident that we're going to see, either you're going to see more of people going to the same Dropbox, and maybe we will come across good, clear video. But even if we don't, the message is, why are we not watching a Dropbox? What's the good of a surveillance camera if A, nobody's really looking at it anyway, right, you know, and B, if it's not focused on the Dropbox, if it's not, then we're kidding ourselves. We're spending millions of dollars for a shell game. So anyway, long answer to a simple question. We do have it. It's not what people would think, but the pings are what back it all up and tie it all together.
Have you tried to be, let me rephrase that, has anyone tried to censor you on speaking on this? Because I heard in one of your interviews that Fox asked you not to bring up a topic. Was that regarding election integrity?
It was regarding specifically the movie, and you know, they've held a pretty tight line. They do not want to talk about the movie, and you know, I think they made a bad choice. But that's been broadly true. I mean, here in Florida, there's supposed to be an event. Well, there is an event tonight or tomorrow night where they were using Eventbrite to sell tickets, and my understanding is that Eventbrite, once 2,000 Mules came up, they quashed it, and that stuff has happened a lot.
Happened to us.
Yep, multiple times at a national level with all, I guess they don't like the movie.
Yeah, you know, to each their own. It hasn't stopped people, though. I mean, that's to me one of the most encouraging things is, you know, despite an almost total block at the corporate media level, and so many outlets not willing to carry it or give voice or exposure to it, nonetheless, it has become one of the top-selling documentaries, you know, of the decade is what the last I heard. So I mean, it's really exciting because people are finding it.
Right, and I think that runs into our culture, and not all citizens, but some, and even our politicians, is why is there a theme of people not acknowledging that we had fraud in the 2020 election?
Right. It's so in my opinion, intellectually dishonest, right? I mean, you know, we watch news cycles 24/7 about government corruption. There's corruption everywhere, but with elections, no, we all wear halos and there are no mistakes. Everything is perfect and we dare not ask. And that's the really insidious part, right? Is you can't ask. We all that America has been fed and is supposed to accept is it was perfect. It was safe. When so much information runs counter to that, you know, and then we talk about it time and again in the hearings that we've attended, and certainly in the movie. But when you have dirty voter rolls, which is well known, and you catalyze those dirty voter rolls with mass mail out of mail ballots that are being sent to inaccurate addresses and to voters that no longer live at the residence, or maybe no longer live, or maybe have never lived, and then push those to drop boxes that are not being well contained or well monitored. It's just a recipe for disaster. And so how it would be that we would accept that our government and our media spokespeople are just saying nothing to see here, just it belies common sense.
So on both sides of the political spectrum, do you think that the Republicans and both Democrats have a little bit of fear that if your data can prove that there was 2020 election fraud, that same data can also prove things that were going on behind the scenes that were corrupt as well?
It definitely can, and I do think that there's a level of fear to, wow, if that data is about all of us, that I'm in there, and what's it going to show about me?
And snowball effect.
Right, and I think that that's true, but I honestly think the bigger fear for most politicians is sort of twofold. Number one, if a politician has held the line about it being the safest, most secure, no fraud here, no problem, move on, we got to get past 2020, all the things that they say, it takes a big person to acknowledge, hey, we didn't have access to this, and we're going to come clean. We weren't really watching the surveillance video, or maybe we didn't even have it. But now that we have it,
We're going to do better.
We're going to do better. You would think that that would be an appropriate and responsible position to take.
The natural next step.
Exactly right. And you know what? No harm, no foul if that were the case.
Sure.
I mean, let's work together. Let's figure it out. Hey, it was new for all of us. There's a lot of weird stuff going on in 2020. Let's figure it out. I think that the second layer to that is not only the acknowledgement of, hey, maybe some stuff did happen that we didn't see, but beyond that, it's, and now what? Now what? Because now we really do have a problem on our hands, and now we really do have to get to the bottom of it, and people are going to want to know. It is much easier to bet that America is going to forget. We tend to have a very short attention span. I don't think we're going to have a tendency to forget this. It's 2 years in, and we're still holding the line on something is not right, and the numbers are only growing. 80-something% now of America is like, we got to get to it. Something's not right. And I will also tell you, True the Vote is getting calls from not just Republicans, but Democrats, people around the world saying, we see what's happening here and it's not right. So there is a new move, and I think it is a movement of the people, and I think that it is a movement that is going to, the momentum is in our favor, and it is going to push back against the politicos and power brokers that are trying to feed us this line when we know better in our guts that you can't have a process that is clearly as broken as it is and expect people to believe that there could not be errors. I mean, that just doesn't make sense. And the fact that you won't look at it tells you that there's something deeper happening.
There was so much energy put into election fraud for 2016 and chasing it. And
that's right.
Chasing.
Right.
And then you've got 2020 where they're being handed, just bounties of evidence.
Right.
And instead of, like you said, looking at it and saying, okay, things messed up.
Right.
And fixing it.
Right.
But ignoring it and expecting the citizens of this country to just ignore it alongside with them.
Like it'll go away.
Right.
And people are fed up. People are fed up. And that is one of the county groups. This is the key to America's continued not just survival, but thriving is at the county level, working locally to make sure that your elections are safe and secure and transparent and all the things that we hope that our process would be. But starting that at the county level is the key, because what you see, again, with talking heads, they just as soon would gloss over this and keep rolling until the whole thing cracks in half, and we are perilously close to that now. And once that happens, that's hard to reel back. Once it's cracked and Americans just go, forget it, then where do you start? Because if leadership won't do what could be, by comparison, the easy stuff now, where we could get it contained and we could get it improved, if they won't do that, then how is this group of dunderheads going to pull it together when things really break down?
And will confidence ever be restored
in
our election system?
That's right. So, heavy stuff.
If law enforcement is unwilling to make arrests and take the evidence and take it to the next step, because citizens can't go around arresting people, where do we go from there?
Yeah.
That's right. And I'll give you another point of view on that. Not only is law enforcement dragging its heels, and we've seen some good stuff out of Arizona, and I want to give full-on credit to law enforcement that has moved forward. But I will also tell you that we have seen the tendency to want to make us the targets.
Right.
So we go in and tell them everything we know and give them, carte blanche to everything that we've done, and suddenly it's turned on us in a political way to make a mockery of the work or to try to discredit in an effort to gain political advantage, which I don't give a rip about the political advantage. What happened. Investigate it and see for yourself. And if there was nothing there, then you have investigated it and nothing was there. But give it an honest look. Don't come at it with a political bias or agenda that you're just looking to fulfill. You've already written the story. You've already closed the case. Mm-hmm. You just now need to backfill it and cause enough, as much collateral damage as you can to make sure that it never happens again that a citizen group or individuals come forward and speak out. Mm-hmm. Because if they can achieve that, well, then it's game, set, and match. Because if you don't have a recourse, people they totally lose hope. Mm-hmm. So it's a slippery slope, but that's all the more reason that people have to keep speaking out. It can't just be one group or me or it's got to be all of us, ever vigilant to defend our elections and accord our liberty.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about the after effects of 2000 Mules. So the documentary came out, it was very successful. What has happened? Has law enforcement gotten involved? Have there been indictments? What justice has been restored in this process?
Right. So far, the biggest movement that we've seen is out of Arizona, where the day after they were, we had some whistleblowers come forward to us that had been very frustrated. This is like in late 2020, they were part of the creation story of all of this. They had seen and reported on election fraud that had not been acted upon or not had been investigated. Mm-hmm. So we went through this entire 2021 continuing to work with and help and support as that investigation in Arizona continued to come together. Ultimately, they indicted two people, one of whom was set to plead not guilty, and then the movie came out, and one of the features in the movie is a whistleblower that says this is exactly what happened, and there was a connection between those two, and that person who had pled not guilty changed her plea to guilty, and we'll see what happens, but based upon the sentencing that she got, one might make the case that she took a plea deal in order to talk more broadly about the much more expansive grift that's going on there. Mm-hmm. And so those are the kinds of things. And since then they've announced I think 16 new investigations that have opened. So we're very hopeful that that's going to continue on. Other jurisdictions, it's a little more difficult because it's very, very, very political. And an example that doesn't pertain to True the Voter to me per se, but in Wisconsin, there was, in our movie, we featured a guy by the name of Michael Gableman. And he did a great job doing a very thorough 2-year-long investigation, looking at and investigating and talking, interviewing and people that, and you may recall from the movie, there's this sort of a section where they talked about people that had their votes stolen from long-term care facilities, who were clearly not within their capacity to cast a vote, but yet somehow they're voting, and their families were there with them and expressing concern. Well, Justice Gableman was the one that brought all that to light. So a couple weeks ago, that process ended. I don't know if it was because the funding ended or if it came to a natural culmination. I'm not sure, but it's over. Now they are turning the tables on Justice Gableman and trying to hold him in contempt of court for not providing all of the records that they say he has when he doesn't have them. And it's this effort to now isolate and create this chilling effect for all the world to see, and certainly for all of Wisconsin to see, that this person who held the line and led the charge in their state is now potentially looking at jail time. I mean, that's how.
Discredit.
Right. That's right.
Right.
And so what's the message, right? The message is, don't you dare. Don't
Right.
you dare ask these questions, because we will come at you with the full weight and force of the government to silence you. And we have to rally around stuff like that. I mean, it's happened to us in other ways, and I'm certain that we're not nearly past all of this for us, but there will come a time, I venture to guess, when we're going to be put in that same framing, and what can you do? I mean, we've got to stand against it.
Now, switching to a little bit of drama. 15 months ago, you helped develop new data. You took it to a federal level, and you've said that information could come out in 6 weeks. Can you share a little bit about that with us?
Well, so yes, so I'm going to share a little bit. So at the same time that we were trying to decide what to do relative to whether or not drop boxes were being exploited, and that ultimately became 2,000 Mules, we were also looking at securities around other aspects of the elections. What we uncovered was so jarring that we immediately took it to federal law enforcement. And that began a 2-year-long period of working in concert with them at their behest to try to gather more information and more completely understand what was happening. And you can see I'm kind of dancing around my words here. So here's where we're at on this. We don't want to get ahead of an investigation, but at this point there's no reason to believe that it is still going on for other reasons that are both shocking and heartbreaking, because as recently as a couple months ago, the joint consensus of everybody that was involved in this broader conversation was that this had to be stopped before the midterms, but it's not being stopped. And so the challenge and one of the reasons I'm so hesitant about it is a great big revelation, and you want to avoid it. It has to be told, but also it's going to create a vacuum in certain areas in elections in certain of the big counties, and well, any county. There's I think 4 counties here in Florida that this will impact, I believe. Well, they'll have to figure out another way to manage these processes, and it would have just been great if law enforcement would have done something, And now we're sort of at this moment of truth. Like, do we just say nothing, or do we tell America? And neither one is a really, is really a
ideal
scenario, or there's no really any certainty around the outcome on either side. So anyway, that's the situation, and I'm sorry to be so vague, but we want to package all of this up and have it presented at a point and to an audience of influencers. I'm hopeful you guys will be there and we can present this all together with you and others, and try to break through the wall that corporate media will no doubt put up, and present it in a responsible way, and then do what Americans do, which is figure out what we do now. Because that's really what all of this is about. Is you can only examine the problems, to a point, and then it has to be about solutions. So we need to figure out what's going on, and then, or share with what we believe is going on, and then figure out where we go from here.
If law enforcement doesn't do what they should do, how do we as citizens at a local level help restore confidence in our elections locally?
The first thing that should be done, and that citizens can do, and it's a granular process, but it can be done, is get your voter rolls clean.
Okay.
And the way that can occur at the citizen level is through processes that almost every state has a function referred to as a voter challenge or an elector challenge. And what it does, what the feature does, is it allows a voter who recognizes that another voter or voting record in their jurisdiction or in their county no longer meets the qualifications of eligibility. So maybe that means that the person has moved, or they have died, or they're registered twice, or something along those lines. And so one of the things that True the Vote has done to help equip citizens is we've created an app that allows you to go in, look at your local voter rolls, and then we've pre-sifted based on certain queries to identify these things. So then what happens is you find these records, you turn them into the county, and then it begins the process of inactivating them. It is not a fast process. It's not something that citizens should have to do. Technology and data exist to avoid this, but that's number one. Even though it is a longer process, it has to start. We have got to get our rolls cleaned up, and we've got to hold them to a higher standard. And it is amazing what happens when government knows that citizens are watching. They tend to behave better. Observation tends to change things. So that's one. Even though it's a longer process, but it needs to start immediately, because it's the gateway to fraud. Past that, then yes, absolutely, volunteering and being involved in every level of our elections. How would you do that? Reach out to the party or candidate of your choice and tell them that you want to work in elections, and where can you work on their behalf. But more specifically, you can go to your local election administrator, whatever that looks like in your state, and just have a conversation. I want to work in elections. Tell me. And go in being a value add, being an asset, right? Where are the typical bottlenecks? Where are you short on people? What are the challenges that you face? And just sort of get a feel. None of this, sadly, is a typical experience for both the election administrator or a citizen to call and just kind of have these, I want to put me in, coach, where? But there are so many places. What happens currently is you either have a sort of a standard slate of people that work every election, and they may or may not, there's supposed to be parity of party at the polls.
Right.
That may or may not be true, right? There may not be actual, and in most cases there's far from parity. There's typically not fair representation, or there's no representation at all. There are insufficient numbers of volunteers, and then you get into a lot of the just gaps in process, failure relative to chain of custody, machine errors increase or can be exploited, weaknesses can be exploited. All of those things, if you are hands-on and watching, the likelihood of something like that occurring, of some malfeasance or fraud occurring, just ratchets down. So being involved there.
In providing support, oversight happens.
Absolutely. And then I think the last piece would be, and there are many, but one of the last pieces would be hold your elected officials accountable. And at the local level, very sort of blocking and tackling kinds of conversations. If you're in a state that doesn't have photo voter identification, you need to get photo voter identification. I'm a big fan of paper ballots. Right. That's a big lift, right? Because that introduces a whole new series of processes that go along with it, that if you're not well equipped to manage it, can get out of hand really quickly. But there are a lot of these kinds of broad conversations that we have to have. America has been left in the dust relative to election security and technology and process. Other countries, most industrialized countries, are so far ahead of us technologically. You know, before we abandoned Afghanistan, they were using retinal scans to vote. And of course, our military protected their elections. You can look at almost any industrialized country and pick elements, or in fact the whole entire process, that far exceeds what we have become accustomed to having here in this country. So it's just time, and sure. It's not time only to band-aid what we have, but it's time for the innovators and the leaders and the creators to step in. And as we see technology advance, you know, year upon year upon year, our elections need to be doing the same. We need to be able to provide the security, the efficiency, the transparency, and the integrity that America deserves.
Mm-hmm. So we have 3 target counties in Georgia that are Fulton, Chatham, and Gwinnett. Do you know if there's any fraud in either of those?
We did not look in Chatham, but in the other 2, yes.
Do you know to what extent we're up against?
Well, Fulton certainly is a challenge. You know, that's where the bulk of the mules were found. Really poor video coverage. So if you're targeting that area, now they've actually passed an election integrity bill that now has moved those drop boxes. Just, you know, this goes under the category you cannot make this stuff up. They passed an election integrity bill to move the drop boxes inside buildings, but then they took off the cameras. So it's like, well, you already had the cameras, so why would you, right. Or at least provision for the cameras. So that's a bit of a, you know, shuffle. But one thing you could do is say, okay, we want, as part of the in the run-up to elections, typically there's a period that's referred to, or a process that's referred to as logics and accuracy testings, sort of a calibration. I mean, there's like a period where they're going through and just sort of double checking, or should be double checking everything. And so as a citizen, or as an organization of citizens, going and saying, we just want to see the surveillance video, and we want to see how that's measuring what's happening at that internal drop box. Mm-hmm. You know, get it on record and make sure that it's actually pointed at the drop box and showing it. What other kinds of fraud? I mean, look, we didn't measure at all mailboxes. You know, I mean, that was totally outside of our scope of review. So there may be value in looking at that. And Georgia's voter rolls are a disaster. I mean, we challenged in late 2020, in December of 2020, in the run up to the runoff election, we challenged, as in the process I described, and it's called an elector challenge. And in Georgia, you can challenge an elector all the way up to the day before an election, this is a different process than just going at a clean sweep at the voter rolls. This process in Georgia, which is unique, is meant to identify potentially ineligible records and then require that they show their accurate residency, or some proof of their accurate residency when they show up to vote. So it shouldn't have been a big problem, because in Georgia you have to show your ID anyway. So you're going to show your ID, and assuming it matches what your voter record says, great. And if not, you voted provisional, and you can still cure it, as curing is now kind of all the rage. So that's all possible. But the rolls hadn't been cleaned in almost 2 years in Georgia when we did this. And so before we did this, I went to meet with Secretary Raffensperger and his team, and said, look, we're going to look at all of these names, and we're not going to single out any counties. We're going to do it equally across the state so that we can't be accused of targeting. This is not about anything other than just accurate data. And in doing so, we've come up with, at that point, over 364,000 ineligible records. And the reason I met with them at the time was, I said, this is when this gets going, we'll have volunteers in all the counties that want to participate in this and are wanting their counties to make sure that the records are accurate for the runoff. When this gets going, it's going to leave a mark, because that's a huge number.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not trying to kick up any dust, but I mean, it is what it is. The rolls haven't been clean. And at the time, Secretary Raffensperger said, no, I think that's about right. Kind of, he did sort of a back of the napkin math, like, if 14% of America moves every year and there's so many people registered.
Sure.
Yeah, it's about right, is what he said. So, okay, we go down this path 2 days after we I forget if we file the challenge or if we just talk about filing the challenge. But we get sued by Fair Fight. We're still in that lawsuit against Stacey Abrams to this very moment. But those names are still on the rolls. He did I shouldn't say he, but the office did a sort of a very light touch of maintaining the rolls, or a cleaning of the rolls. But it was a few tens of thousands. I mean, it was nowhere near what needed to happen. And so now what we know is that in the general election, about 65,000 in general in 2020, about 65,000 ineligible voters voted. And in the runoff, about 35,000 ineligible voters voted, according to state law and what constitutes eligibility. That has not been fixed. So I think the greatest exposure in Georgia right now is the fact that your rolls are inaccurate, and you push that together with mail ballots, and that's become
a recipe.
That's a recipe for disaster.
What about Florida? Are there any counties that stick out in Florida?
There are a few counties that stick out in Florida, but I would just say overall, just broad brush, Florida is a laboratory of good process and proactive engagement, led by, I'm just a huge Governor DeSantis fan, led by example. When we first started with sort of showing the basic beginnings of our research that ultimately became 2,000 Mules, we had the opportunity to meet very briefly with Governor DeSantis and showed him it was probably 20-30 minutes, not a whole lot of time. And I mean to tell you, he got it. He asked very insightful questions, got it. Okay, and if you think about it like, okay, what's the problem? The problem is that ballots are being trafficked. Why is that? Because nobody's watching those drop boxes and nobody's enforcing the laws. What can be done about that? And that became, I think, a part over time of what Florida now passed in their election integrity sort of omnibus. That is super smart, and it's common sense. So to me, look at that path of fearless leadership that says, hey, here's an idea, let's just enforce the laws.
Right.
Novel. Right.
And not a wild idea.
Right. And so, I mean, that's what we should all be doing. And I believe that, the interesting thing about election fraud, particularly, or maybe fraud of all types, is when you're being watched and it's being taken seriously, then the chances of it occurring go down. So hopefully all of this effort, results in no problems at all. And of course, then the detractors will say, well, why are we spending all of this money? Because there are no problems. But you're not having problems because you are spending the money and you are being engaged. So anyway, I think on balance, Florida is a great example of leadership at the top that is saying, it's not about Republicans or Democrats, it's about preservation of the Republic, and we're going to hold the line on the laws, and that is going to benefit all Floridians, and I think it is a
election integrity is nonpartisan.
It's exactly right.
Everybody wants integrity in our election system and confidence in it.
Exactly right. And I think over time we are now seeing increasingly Americans of any political stripe just saying, "Come on, guys, really, help us out here. Hold the line on the laws. Make it so that we can be confident." And then we can, as Republicans and Democrats, independents, whatever, we can fuss and fight about all the policies we want. But when we go vote, that ought to be sacrosanct. Right. We ought to be able to meet each other in that moment as Americans and feel confident that the outcome really, truly reflects where we're headed.
Right.
And that has been so abused and manipulated and subverted and sold out over time that we're at a tipping point. And I think we're going to respond beautifully. And Florida is a great example of heading in the right direction.
Last county question, back to your home state, Harris County, Texas.
So Harris County is an interesting county. One of the best things that our governor did, Governor Greg Abbott, was got rid of all drop boxes except for one per county. So that was taken off the board. But what we didn't stop in Harris County was what was referred to as drive-through voting. And I don't know what's going to be happening in the upcoming in the general, but in the last election in 2020, of course it was under the guise of COVID. They just had parking garages where you could just go and cars would be full of people, and an attendant would come up to you, and it's almost like a combination of going to vote and going to a Sonic. People would just come up to your window and pass around the ballots, and it was just all kinds of bad. That's an issue. The voter rolls in Harris County are an issue, and broadly just the process of I guess it was in just before 2020 they instituted for the first time a selected election administrator that was very beholden to the party that put them in office, and so it was not an unbiased sort of supervision of process, and a lot of things have kind of gone a little bit haywire. But we'll see. We'll see. Yeah.
I think we're good.
I think we're good. Catherine, thank you so much
Absolutely.
for coming on Liberty USA.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me.
Hopefully we'll talk to you again soon once that bomb drops.
We'll look forward to it.
It's going to be something.
Yeah.
We need to stand together.
We do. Well, thank you.
Thank you.